Welcome to the World Football Summit podcast, the show for football industry leaders who want to stay ahead of the game. We bring you the latest insights, trends, and stories from the experts driving innovation and progress in sports business worldwide. Join us as we dive deep into the ideas and initiatives transforming the world of football. From sustainability and innovation to player development, fan engagement, and everything in between. Our goal is to unite the global football industry and drive positive change and progress. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I'm your host, Jaime, CMO at World Football Summit. If you're a follower of the podcast or simply interested in the football industry, I'm pretty sure you have asked yourself at some point about which are the markets with the greatest potential for football, right? Well, on today's show, we're going to try and answer that question thanks to our friends from LTT Sports. We have just launched, in collaboration with them, a detailed report that looks into a group of markets to assess where most of the growth will come from. And just a little spoiler, it seems it would not be from Europe. You will be able to download it from our website, and you can find the link in the show notes. Today is the first of a series of conversations we will have over the next couple of months about this topic. And on today's show, Konstantin Kornakov and Fathi Abou Gadaiel, speaker at World Football Summit Africa, in fact, join me to discuss the main findings of the report, trends, and we discuss 3 specific markets. I was very tempted to tell you which ones they were, but I think it's best you listen to the episode. And you know it, Juan Valdez, which is 100% premium Colombian coffee, did not miss it. As you know, I am very picky when it comes to coffee, and I must say, Juan Valdez definitely hits the bar. But this cup of coffee is much more than that. It is a premium blend developed by female coffee makers, and Juan Valdez has this program in which they look to empower these women both economically and socially. This resonates very much with the Female Leadership in Football initiative we launched at World Football Summit a few months back, so I'm very excited to partner with them to offer this premium blend to you. You can order it online at es.juanvaldez.com. Again, that's es.juanvaldez.com. And they actually have a special discount for the World Football Summit podcast listeners. All you need to do is enter the code WFS podcast at checkout. Again, that's WFS spelled in capital letters, podcast at checkout. And they deliver to all markets in Europe. So give it a try and let me know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast on your platform of choice and share it with your industry colleagues. It helps us a lot. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, where every week we send updates, trends, and everything that goes on at our events. You can find the link in the show notes. And finally, remember, there's still time to buy your tickets for WFH Asia, taking place in Jeddah, on Saudi Arabia on December 12th and 13th. Actually, our friends from LTT Sports will not miss it. So head over to asia.worldfootballsummit.com. Again, that's asia.worldfootballsummit.com and buy the ticket that will secure your spot among the football industry's greatest minds. Now, enjoy this conversation with Fathi and Konstantin from LTT Sports. Well, Konstantin, welcome to the World Football Summit podcast. It's great to have you. I think today, we're in for a treat of a conversation. We're going to talk about the potential of football around the world. I mean, what else can we ask for, no?
Well, thank you very much, Jaime. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you. And yeah, hopefully we can shed some interesting light on what's happening around the world. Because football, as we all know, is a global game.
It is. And for those who don't know yet, we're going to talk about a great report that you guys at LTT Sports have prepared, and we've prepared together, and with a very interesting methodology and very more surprising conclusions, no? But before we go into it, can you introduce yourself? And I always like to ask my guests why is you do what you do, and specifically to this conversation. I mean, why was this report necessary for the football industry?
So just to introduce myself and LTT Sports, we are a kind of young team, but obviously getting older with every year passing, but a lot of experience in the football industry, also in the corporate world, And we are kind of a distributed team. So we are a team that's based all around the world. I'm based in the UK. We have offices in Poland. We have representation in Switzerland and France, in Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So we're kind of increasingly expanding our international reach as well. And one of the things that we like is football. Football, football beyond a profession, a job is our passion. So we like to do things slightly differently. We like to focus on the global football ecosystem, because a lot of times you tend to see that people tend to concentrate more on the top leagues, on the top competitions, and they only work with the Premier League and La Liga, for example, and everything else doesn't matter. We like to, for us, they are equally important. Premier League or an Estonian league, for example. And we like to work with clubs, with leagues, with organizations from all countries, all backgrounds, because, as I said, we love football, and we would not like to see this variety to disappear from it. So this is also a little bit answering the question of why this report, why this publication, because football is going through a very interesting transition. On one side, we see focus on premium properties. Well, we see a lot of concentration in the big competitions, the big leagues. There is a stat that is going around that, for example, the media rights paid in Scandinavian countries, they pay more for Premier League rights in England than for their domestic competitions. And for us, this is a big question. How sustainable is this in the long term for the domestic football all around the world? So at the same time, how long can you sustain this interest in football across the world just on an EPL or a Champions League?
Mm-hmm.
Surely you also need to have something interesting at home, domestically. And this is where a lot of the growth that we envisage for the next decades surely is going to come from outside the big markets that have already, almost reached a ceiling in terms of where they can develop. Although, having said that, of course, the Premier League is still the fastest growing league in Europe if you look at the UEFA statistics, and this is also another problem that kind of we would like to address with our work. So we like to equalize a little bit the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for that assessment, by the way. But I couldn't agree more, because at the end of the day, you need local football. It's, from my point of view at least, it's what really inspires young kids to grow and play, and that grows the base, which effectively is going to end up even growing the business, because the quality of the play is going to be better, the league is going to be better, and that's going to attract more fans, more sponsors. At the end of the day, it's good for business, not to have that those local roots, if you will, right? So it makes complete sense. So let's start with, rather than, just really going into some findings, I don't know, first, if you want to summarize very briefly how you developed this report. What was the methodology that you followed?
Okay, yeah. So just to explain a little bit, the starting point for us was to say, okay, we want to learn about what is the status of club and league football across the world. Because whenever you look at football, at the football industry now, the focus tends to be on Europe. And within Europe, it tends to be on the biggest competitions, right? So we wanted to go completely the opposite way, and we said, okay, excluding Europe, what else, what is happening around the world? How can we learn about what is going on? And the best way to learn is to talk to people, right? Yeah. Because, of course, you can look at statistics. In some cases, that's difficult to do, actually, as we'll probably talk about later. But talking to people is the best way to learn about these clubs, about how they perceive their situation, about how they're working, what their dreams are, what their goals are. So that was the starting point. And then, once you want to look beyond Europe, there are more than 150 countries outside of Europe that are members of FIFA, for example. So it's impossible to cover everything unless you're FIFA,
Yeah.
without doing a selection. And then, if you want to have a balanced view, a balanced outlook, then you need to have a kind of geographical representation. You need to have demographic representation, so in terms of population size, in terms of the size of the economy, in terms of the current level of football development as well, which is, of course, it's not an objective set of criteria beyond the demographics and the economy, but it is something that then allows you to say, okay, we select 20, 30 countries that we'll look at, but this is a group that is kind of representative of what is happening around the world. And of course, football is organized on a confederation basis globally, so you need to cover countries from different confederations to be sure that you are having a representative sample. So that was kind of our methodology, starting with the fact that we're looking everything outside of Europe. We want to talk to as many people as possible within those ecosystems domestically, and then we need to have a selection of countries because we can't include absolutely everybody. It's not possible.
It's not possible. But I think it gives a good overview of what's going on around the world, no? So thank you for sharing that. And to you, what were the 3 main conclusions of the report without giving too much away so people can actually download it and read it in detail?
Well, interestingly, the way we constructed it is, the conclusions are there to be drawn for every individual reader and of the report. You look at it and you can draw your own conclusions because we are presenting the comparative basis, but you can also utilize this opportunity to think for yourself and to draw your own conclusions. But for us, so probably best to talk about observations. What did we observe, right? Because we can never conclude. And what we observed of interesting things, obviously, despite what I said before, football is a global sport, right? It's played everywhere around the world. It's probably one of the most recognizable things anywhere in the world. You don't, there's this famous joke about talking the language of football, which means you don't need to talk any other language. You can be understood anywhere.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that football seems to still be very much focused on a domestic and maybe maximum confederation level. So people are still really, when they look at themselves, when they're working in their club or in their league, they're looking at what's happening inside their domestic ecosystem. They're looking at what's happening on the confederation level, but they're less focused on what is going on globally, beyond, of course, the information that they will receive about the biggest competitions, as we said before, about the Premier League or the Champions League, the UEFA Champions League. So it is interesting that even though it is global, people still tend to look at it on a very much local level. And another thing that seemed to jump out at us is that there are obviously some major development projects that hopefully will mature over the next decade or so, because we spoke about those big competitions that are currently kind of at the top of the pyramid, but you're also seeing that around the world, in different confederations, in different geographical areas, people are really starting to think very, very seriously about what they can do to develop their domestic or continental product to take it to a higher level. And interestingly, this kind of comes a little bit on the tails of, maybe you could argue the failure is a big word, but what happened to the Chinese project, for example, which everybody thought 5 years ago that this is going to be the kind of the hugest thing ever, and kind of through various factors, not least because of the impact of COVID, it kind of got derailed, right? And it showed how quickly things can go south. But bearing that in mind, there seem to be several kind of hotspots of really potential that should become very, very evident over the next decade. And of course, in the last few months, in the last year, everybody's talking about the Saudi project. But it's not the only one, right? It's not the only one. MLS and the J League have been kind of they've been working for the last 30 years, but even beyond them, there are still others that should appear on the map. And it's not about copying, for example, the Premier League or Champions League model, but it's also about coming up with their own take on things, which I think is very, very, very significant. And maybe the last thing connected to the first point about the fact that people seem to look at things on a local maximum confederation level. It is interesting. It was very interesting for us to observe that football ecosystems in the different countries tend to benchmark themselves against the neighbors, right? So if you're in Mexico, you benchmark yourself against the US. If you are if you're in Japan, you will benchmark yourself against Korea, for example. And of course, it's obvious, and there is a logic in doing that, but they might not end up being the best benchmarks for you, because of the fact that despite you being in the same geographical area, kind of all the other factors might be very, very, very different. So, for us, it was interesting also to think that a country like Mexico, for them, instead of looking at the US and the MLS as the benchmark, maybe it would be interesting for them to think about the J League as a counterpoint, because the countries you could argue there are a lot of similarities in terms of the geo-economical aspects of countries, and at the same time, it could open up interesting opportunities because Mexico and MLS, yes, you can benchmark, but they are rivals at the same time because they're kind of competing in the same space. But if you want to benchmark yourself against Japan, being the Mexican League, or Brazil, for example, you're not such a close competitor. So maybe once you start looking in more detail there, maybe there are more opportunities for collaboration, for partnerships, for actually growing together, which is an interesting thought.
Very interesting. And that's what I mean, you mentioned two things there that's summarized very well what I like most about the reports. First, the growth. Obviously, everybody's talking about Saudi, but there's so many hidden, call it quote unquote gems, many hidden markets that potentially, if things go well, they could become, I'm not sure if major powerhouses in the short term, but very relevant across the ecosystem. And the second is precisely that, no? If we're talking about a global game, why are we not comparing leagues across global markets? Why are we just comparing ourselves to global to nearby regions or to nearby markets, right? At the end of the day, there's many similar dynamics going on across countries that, in theory or in paper, may not have anything to do with each other. But once you look at the data, you find, oh, wow, this is very similar. So that's, I think, the value of the report. So yeah, that's very interesting. And going back to what you said at the very beginning, you said, well, it's really up to the reader to identify what is more surprising. So I want to ask you, what surprised you most? Is there any one thing that surprised you most?
Well, it's a simple, but it's a very difficult question. For me, maybe one of the things, I don't know if it is surprising or actually very, very positive, that, across all the conversations that we've had, across all the countries, across all the clubs and leagues that we touched for this report, there is an almost unanimous desire to grow and develop. So people really feel that there is a real opportunity on their hands to grow. So there is obviously a feeling in the air that things are happening, things are moving, that there is a chance to develop. And football is no longer kind of European with all respect, being from Europe. It's not just a European playground where, yes, football exists everywhere and you have nice teams like, I don't know, Brazil, Argentina, or wherever, but kind of everything seems to flow into Europe, right? But there is something that tells me that maybe the movement is going to start going the other way as well. And one other thing that maybe is a bit more technical that was surprising, and actually it connects a little bit with your point before about why not looking at leagues horizontally, comparing them across the board, is actually lack of data. Because a lot of, I don't want to say that it was difficult in all cases, but in some particular areas, it was difficult to obtain robust data related to football. And obviously, in this case, yes, you can talk to people, you can kind of find out the reality on the ground, but without data, it is difficult to have an objective comparison, right? And even where there is data, it might be presented in different formats. It might be kind of difficult to compare it on a like-for-like basis. And this is where the fact that football is organized very much on these confederational bases makes it kind of difficult, because yes, you can compare within Europe, you can compare within Asia, you can compare within South America, North America, but then it is difficult to bring it all together to compare on a completely horizontal basis. So yeah. I don't know, maybe we have started something, maybe we can pull our minds together and we can come up with a way to benchmark absolutely everybody. That would be the dream. Actually,
that would be great. It would be great if someone read this report and said, hey, I want to contribute to this because I really want to get a better picture of what's going on, and then have clubs reach out. So if you listen to this and you're interested, feel free to reach out to the LTT Sports team. I'm sure they're going to be more than happy to talk to you. And maybe there's just data that they aren't aware of, and it's going to help improve the report for, hopefully years to come. No? And obviously each market has its own dynamics. Each region has, very different trends or that are impacting it. But just wondering, is there any common pattern that you see that's impacting the world in general, or no?
Beyond COVID and the whole kind of uncertainty in the socio-political, economic uncertainty. Well, one of the things that we tended to see is, and kind of it was confirmed a little bit through the work that we did, is that demographics and the economy are actually critical factors at the end of the day. Because you need to have, in the modern game and the modern business model, you need to have a large market, and you need to have a relatively wealthy market, because you need to have people to be able to pay for something that the football industry is giving them. So if you're really, really struggling economically to cover your basic needs, then obviously football is not going to be one of those basic needs, unless, of course, football can project itself that way, which is also the case in some situations, of course. Yeah. And this is where kind of a major problem with what we call the English football business model is that the English football business model relies on having a large population and a very wealthy population that is able to sustain all of this economic expenditure. Once you have, you can have a rich population, but if it's a smaller population, then you cannot generate this kind of mass market effect, right? Or if it's a large market but relatively poor, then it becomes difficult. But actually, you're still able to leverage the significance of the demography. And I actually, on a side note, recently we also did a publication looking at specifically African countries and leagues and clubs. And as part of that exercise, we tried to project a little bit the media rights potential of those markets, countries that we looked at. And, even given the relative, the smaller economic capacity of a market like Egypt, for example, compared to the UK or the United States, you can still potentially generate very significant amounts from the media rights, which could then underpin the domestic ecosystem, serve as one of the key revenue streams. And the numbers that they're realizing at the moment are nowhere near that. So there is obviously a lot of room to growth. And those are the macro trends probably the macro trend that we saw. That demographics and economy is important. Of course, the quality and the attachment to football is also important, because as we saw, we mentioned China before, a country which is massive with a massive economy, but not really connected in any meaningful way to football beyond a modern interest. You're struggling a little bit to try and fit it into the culture. So if you're like Brazil, and I know we will probably talk about Brazil in more detail later. If you're a country like Brazil, huge population, huge economy, huge football culture, then surely you will be on to a winner.
Yeah. And as you said, I mean, you mentioned earlier, no, that you didn't have time to, or that it wasn't possible to fit every single market into the report. And unfortunately, we don't have time to fit, at least for now, every single market into this conversation. So what we have done, guys, for anybody listening out there, is we're going to talk about 3 specific markets, which are Brazil, Canada, and Saudi. So, and just to get a brief overview of what's going on, because we identified, well, obviously Brazil, everybody knows, that's pretty much where legends are made. Canada makes sense because of, their upcoming role hosting the World Cup, and Saudi, because as you said earlier in the conversation, it's just becoming such a disruptive force that it just makes complete sense. No? Let's start with Brazil. I mean, I think for many years, it has been perceived that Brazil has untapped potential. From call it an industry perspective, no? So, what would you say are the advantages or the assets that it has that it makes it unique versus other markets?
Well, I would say Brazil, not untapped potential. I would say it's very much tapped potential, because Brazil has been tapped for many, many decades for hundreds and thousands of players. So for the global football market, Brazil has been a supplier. A leading supplier of playing talent across the board, from high end to just normal professional level players, and we're talking about thousands and thousands, right? So
agree. The thing is, they always, as you said, they send them abroad, right? So I mean,
yes, exactly. So but at the same time, the system in Brazil is so large that obviously it has been able to do that. And the major factors that make Brazil a shoo-in for success in this are what I mentioned before. It's a very large market. You're talking about more than 200 million people in one country, right?
Yeah.
Talking the same language, and it is actually, compared to a lot of countries around the world, it's quite wealthy, and in terms of GDP, in terms of GDP per capita, right? So, of course, people in Brazil might disagree with me, sitting here in a room in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and saying, we're not a wealthy country. But compared to a lot of other nations around the world, Brazil is actually doing quite well, and it's also growing, right? And if you are growing from already a reasonable state, you're going to get even better, right? So clearly there are resources, both human and financial, and there's also, Brazilian football, everybody knows about it. It's a culture, it's a way of life, it's a style, right? So there is no need to invent anything. It must be a marketeer's or a branding specialist's dream, because they don't need to do anything, right? So then the question is, like, why has it not worked before? Obviously, still being the large country that it is, with a set system that it has had for a lot of years, clearly something hasn't really been working. But it does seem to be that next year, 2024, there is an opportunity for the clubs in Brazil to get together and to collectively create maybe a new model that is taking advantage of all the opportunities that the modern sport business industry is able to bring to them. Because in Brazil at the moment, there seems to be a combination of the more traditional associative model of running sports clubs, which are kind of more short-term based, but also can lead to a lot of changes in governance and leadership. And the more what we tend to see, let's say in Europe or in North America, with a more professionalized approach to organization, to managing the clubs and the league. So 2024 seems to be kind of this benchmark year where the broadcasting deals, the individual broadcasting deals, are kind of coming to an end, and there is an opportunity to pull together, essentially. I think if the clubs in Brazil are able to do that, then there's not going to be any stopping them. And
Yeah.
it seems that there is a chance that it might happen. So fingers crossed.
And other than that, other than broadcasting, is there anything else that needs to be true for 2024 be quote unquote that year for Brazilian football?
Well, I think people that are running those clubs, that are running the competitions, obviously they need to get together, and instead of thinking for their individual organizations or the individual interests of a specific club, for example, they also need to think a little bit collectively. And this is kind of strange in a way, but you almost think you have to go back in history to 100 years back when football was just being when it was just being invented and set up, and you had people from different organizations, clubs that the founding fathers, and they were coming together, and they were able somehow to see beyond the individual interests, and they were able to project a little bit into the future, and it has really worked. So I think in the Brazilian case, that is also the critical factor, because they have the people, right? They have the numbers, they have the possibility for finances, they have the companies, for the sponsorship, they have the brands, they have the players, they have. You could say, maybe they could do with better stadiums, for example. But at the end of the day, the Premier League also didn't really start with great stadiums. So that is something that is not a precondition. It's the precondition is the willingness of all the different, or at least the majority of the players in this ecosystem to actually work together and collaborate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of other challenges that you feel are relevant, I mean, very briefly, Konstantin, I mean, I'm just thinking, okay, they need to think collectively. You need support from the government, but I don't know if there's something else that needs to be, a challenge that needs to be overcome. Well,
I mean, I don't want to say that, for example, that the only way to do it is to have an independent league, because, I mean, in the case of Brazil or Argentina, for that matter, the leagues are they are federation managed. I don't want to say that that's, for example, the wrong way, and you really need to have it doesn't matter as long as there is that collective desire. At the end of the day, if you have professional management in the clubs, professional leadership, and this is really what our counterparts in Brazil told us. If you put all of that in, there are coaches, there are technical experts there already as well. So it's not like they need to develop them, from scratch. So it's kind of all the ingredients are there. They just need to be put into the bowl and put on a plate. And I think for me, certainly this is going to be an interesting space to watch, because there is huge potential there. Everybody was talking about
into that. If they're able to find the magic recipe, I mean, watch out, world, exactly. I would say.
Exactly. So, and then the beauty of that is that the likes of Neymar, for example, or before that, the likes of Ronaldo or Ronaldinho, they wouldn't need to go to Europe at such a precocious age. The Brazilian league can accommodate them.
Right. Agree.
For as long as they want, and then instead of saying, okay, yeah, I need to go to play in a European club because it will earn money.
Or 18 or whatever. Yeah, I can just stay there and develop a life there.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Develop, and then I can go also on my terms, not just because I feel pressure, on my terms. And I think that's good.
But in that case, even that's also going to benefit the league, because then those players are going to attract more fans to the game, and that's going to, again, start the flywheel of attracting more sponsors, more partners, which is going to help develop the league, right? So as you said, if they're able to tap into that, I mean, what's up?
Exactly.
Well, thank you for that. And now let's shift over to Canada, because I think it's also relevant, given that we're 2 years away from the 2026 World Cup. So, but I think Canada has potential beyond the World Cup, right? And I want to talk about that because right now, at least my perception is that it's seen as the third player in the group of countries that is hosting the 2026 World Cup. No? So is there potential beyond that for them?
Canada it was an interesting case for us as well because, on one side, you're completely right. They are kind of the smallest out of the bunch of three. And in terms of football development, obviously, they are behind the US and Mexico, but at the same time, things seem to have been maturing quite nicely in Canada. And obviously, they qualified for the World Cup last time, which was kind of a big achievement for them. But the interesting thing with Canada is that football has a lot of history. Soccer, because football in Canada is a different thing, and this is part of the complexity of the whole panorama. But when we were talking about demographics and we were talking about the economy, Canada is actually quite a large country compared to a lot. In Europe, for example, we think we have the top 5 leagues, and those are the countries that have a population above 50 million. Right. So there seems to be a strong correlation between success in football and population size demographic. Canada would actually be one of the larger countries in terms of population in the European continent, because there are not too many that have more than 39, 40 million, but they're actually growing. Unlike in Europe, where populations are actually projected to decrease. In Canada, they're going through the roof, also through immigration. So I think they are projected to have something like 50 million population in not too far time. So they're going to be quite a major country. So quite large on a global scale. They're growing, and it's also a relatively young population, which kind of gives you interesting thoughts.
It is.
And looking beyond the World Cup hosting itself, as I said, the growing population, the wealth of the population, but also you have the factor of the Canadian, of the CPL, that they've introduced it, interestingly, because they needed to, because, as we found out in the interview, that was one of the prerequisites for them to be a bid country. To be a bid country, you need to have a domestic professional league system. So they had to create one, but once it went off the ground, they realized actually there is potential there, because if you think the people and the finances are there, you can actually make quite a successful product.
Yeah, and as you said at the beginning, you need a local league to kind of help develop the players. And obviously, and the good thing is Canada is little by little exporting talent, very good talent, So, for example, Alfonso Davies would be an example, no? But you need the kids to actually grow and have a system to actually shine before they actually get to Europe or wherever, if they stay, because again, maybe they tap into some potential and they stay there, no? So definitely makes sense what they're doing, no? They have the wealth, they have the economics. Now it's just a matter of building the grassroots, right? So. Other than that, is there anything that's limiting its potential? Any obstacles they're facing?
And in Canada, like in the United States, obviously they have the local sports, which are traditional. Ice hockey. They have Canadian football. They have Canadian football, which is kind of similar to the American football, NFL, but slightly different. So, but it also is another code. They have things like, lacrosse also is quite popular in Canada. Obviously, the climate is probably not very football conducive during a lot of the year. But at the same time, when you look at Canada and where its population is located, it's actually quite concentrated, and it's actually quite a narrow band along the southern border with the US. So it's not like you have to cover the entire size of the country. In most of the country, nobody's living, so you can actually place a lot of infrastructure strategically.
Interesting.
It is possible to do. I mean, another thing actually, probably mentioning about the positive things to do with football's potential in Canada, is that you could argue that in Canada, the women's football has been more successful than men's football, right? So actually, they're starting from a position of relative equality. So you can actually grow everything at the same time, which is an interesting factor, because in most countries that's not the case. I'm sure we can talk about this a little bit later, about the potential of women's football in general, but it is something that shouldn't be scouted. I mean, another factor that is kind of limiting, I guess, for the Canadians is the fact that they have franchises in the MLS, which is a little counterintuitive, because you would think if you have teams in a bigger league, then surely it's good for you. But it's almost, if you think of a comparison, it's a little bit like, I don't know, of course the scale is different, but like Wales and Welsh football, when the biggest Welsh clubs playing in the English league system, right? So where does that leave the Welsh league and domestic football in Wales? And yet it is a very important kind of part. Actually, Wales is an interesting comparison also, because football, you could argue, is not the dominant sport in the country, because they have rugby, and Welsh rugby is over the long term has been probably a lot more successful than the Welsh football team. But still, you have this coexistence. So when you have those franchises in the MLS, and they're not really focused on developing local talent, they're kind of engaged in player recruitment, and actually, as we know, recruitment is also kind of centrally done with the MLS to an extent. Kind of, you ask yourself, okay, what kind of value do they bring to the Canadian football ecosystem? Of course, they will bring value to the owners and to the MLS, but to the Canadian football as a whole. And this is where actually it's an interesting opportunity for the CPL, and one that was actually picked up by through our conversations, that it's very easy then for them to project themselves as the Canadian option, right, the local option. And that is interesting in a marketing sense as well, because then you don't have to invent that other that kind of you are coming up against. It's already there. So it's interesting.
It is, and I like your point. I mean, they have unique angles. One, the women's football angle is something that finally we're at a point where we can see it as being something to take into account, and it's something that can give them a competitive advantage. And obviously, and to your point about the MLS franchises, if they find a way to strategically, build that talent temporarily to help players go to the MLS, which is a league that for the time being is maybe, a little bit higher, but then they develop the local talent and they learn from them. And, it is something that if they play it well, it could help them in the long run, right? So thank you for that overview about Canada. Now, I think it makes sense just to obviously speak about Saudi Arabia, as we said before. It's a disruptive force in football, and for that, we're going to welcome Fathi into the conversation. And those of you who follow us know that Fathi has been a speaker at WFS Africa. So happy to have you join us, and let's go into a little bit of a deep dive into Saudi Arabia. Fathi, welcome. So given the level of investment, Fathi, in recent years, is it surprising that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is on tier 2? Could you help us understand why?
Okay. So that's the answer to that question could be really quite simple. And that really because our clustering was not really about tiers or rankings, but was rather clustering countries of similar economy demographic profiles together. So for example here, Saudi Arabia has been categorized as a medium population country with a large economy, which is something a bit like Canada in terms of generating domestic sport market that plays a role within specifically the overall economy. Maybe the current situation refers that Saudi Arabia is a bit far, and that obviously because one thing, that Canada is operating in a 100 million plus market and Saudi Arabia is operating in another market with a 30 million plus. And that could take us to another fact, and that regards Canada's big role within overall US model, within its 5 major leagues such as MLS, MLB, NFL, NHL, and also NBA. They're operating over there for almost 3 decades, which gives them that edge. While Saudi Arabia has just started on that path in 2020, and that by investing, for example, in Saudi Ryder Cup, Formula One Grand Prix, and recently SPL. And here we just wanted to give our listeners and readers that a clear indicators where Saudi Arabia could potentially be on medium and long terms if they're going on the same path and the same direction.
Okay, thank you for that. I just believe, and I also, after watching a panel they had that people from the Ross Saudi League had in World Football Summit Europe in Sevilla this year. There's much more to their strategy beyond just acquiring superstar players, you know? So you know about this market very well. So what would you say are some of the most important levers that, you know, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is looking to, quote unquote, pull to keep positive momentum?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, they are totally correct in terms of going further than just having megastar signings. Otherwise, we would see other similar countries that limited their vision to that extent among top flight leagues globally. So, for example, Saudi Arabia is not the first country to acquire megastars players. However, having such kind of case studies can unlock for them several learning opportunities to avoid their mistakes and achieve higher level of sustainabilities. And here, I would like to enlighten our listeners that such kind of strategies needs a specific expertise transition phase on pitch and off the pitch in order to survive. With note that the most crucial factor here about in any long strategy is people. Since people, they are the ones who are achieving strategy, who are working every day and following the day-to-day operations. So to keep on the high momentum, you really need to empower a human factor within your ecosystem from all perspectives. It's more like 360 view. First approach, it's the off-pitch approach. You should have a main goal of focus to establish a fully professional executive environment, and that should spread it among all clubs or organization structures, and that should be aims to help them to grow independently and working separately. And such things are really requires cooperation between both professional league entities. In Saudi Arabia case, they have Saudi Premier League and First Division League. Both are professional leagues, and they have to cooperate and to communicate with their affiliated clubs. And such kind of support maybe include HR support, for example, such as like setting minimum standards for employees, support in the overall recruitment process to employ the right people at the right places. Also, maybe organizing HR development programs, and all of that. And such kind of this is really maintains and guarantees a highest level of knowledge exchange, for example, from foreign expertise and invested and implemented to local. The second part of implementation here, we could speak about the on-field exchange, which is extremely important to maintain the positive impact of those foreign players on the overall local football. And here I'm stressing over the importance of directing a major part of the investments to improve the national player development. And here it could be like enhancing the grassroots football standards in order to empower national player skills. And that really will help them to be able to compete at the same highest levels and at same levels of foreign players. And here, I just want to conclude my answer here. I just want to refer that Saudi Arabia has already took several milestones on both aspects. Either the executive parts, since 2019, they are appointing a lot of elite industry experts at senior positions. Also on the investment of the youth development, they also have a grassroots programs such as Saudi School Leagues and Saudi Future Falcons. So that's mainly about what they are doing and how they have to keep going.
I agree. And while you were speaking, I was just thinking how everybody tends to compare the Saudi Arabian case with the Chinese example from a few years ago. And to me, the main difference, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but speaking specifically about grassroots, I see that Saudi Arabia has already had major achievements at the national level and has talent coming down from the grassroots. I mean, just look at, even if it's just beating Argentina at the last World Cup, right? Which is something that I would say China wasn't able to achieve, right? So I completely agree. You really need to, I mean, yeah, it's great to bring the stars, but you need to develop the grassroots. That's kind of like the key. You need to elevate the level of football across all levels from the base, to the top of the pyramid, no?
Yeah. Otherwise, you will have some kind of like different two different, the international model and the local model. So the league could be really good, really great, but the national teams could perform in totally separate way, which is not good at this kind of project.
Exactly. And then I'm also thinking that one of the other major differences that I see, and again, there are many, is the level of involvement that the government of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is having in developing the sport, right? And supporting the development of football in the country. A lot of people have asked me this, and I think it's good that I transfer this question over to you. Why are they so involved? Why is this support that they're giving sustainable?
Well, I would say yes, definitely. Government support is always there, but what people need to know is there, but to a certain extent. And this is due to Saudi sports ecosystem structure that somehow makes all sports club under state ownership. And here I just want to go back to history to explain the two following cases to explain how such kind are coming and how its impact on the overall football. The first case, it's back to 70s and 80s, which was the first ever professionalization era. And that comes from General Sports Authority, which was the parallel of current Saudi Sports Ministry. Back then, they implemented the professional ecosystem in the country and then empower it and invest on it with all available tools back then. While, for example, hefty investments in infrastructure has took place. And that was by building over 14 major stadiums back then. However, top-class facilities within top division clubs. However, such facts were more than enough back then to root the game within the national DNA. And that happened through boosting the overall participation and grassroots level, as well as encourage community elite personalities to go over to the clubs and compete strongly to take over the local clubs management. And such kind of things make the Saudi clubs actually operating in a structure or in a way was a bit similar to the self operations, which worked actually later at 90s and 2000s. And the second case, we could also speak about the government involvement, which happened recently back to 2018, which witnessed another direct government interventions and support. And that happens actually due to critical financial situations of some big clubs back then, unfortunately, which forced the country, just to imagine, these cases forced the country to compete in Asian Champions League with only 2 clubs, although Saudi Arabia is having 4 spots to play over there. So back then, Saudi Sports Ministry have started seriously to implement strict governance regulations for the club to ensure that they are really operating in a very safe ways. However, such rules guaranteed equal financial support to all pro league clubs, and that was the purpose, to bridge the gaps, to make the league more competitive, and that's to gradual steps to make teams competitive together in the beginning of every season, because such financial support is helping you to maintain your depths, for example, to have a good signings, to have a good standards, to promote your standards overall. So for sports, such cases prove that government interventions was always there. But it wasn't for a bad ways. It was for promotional reasons, and the other ones was helping the clubs to reach self-operating levels. Maybe some of their approach wasn't sustainable enough, and that always pushed them to give another tries to be more sustainable. And here I just want to refer to the recent transition that they wanted to make to privatization rule that aims to make all clubs operating individually, but in professional environment in the right way, and put them as well, guide them to the right direction. That was it.
Okay, thank you for that. And just to finish the segment about Saudi, I mean, if we were to leave the listeners with, 2 or 3 key ideas that help us understand why this is a unique case in football, what would you say?
Well, so firstly, I just want to thank you so much for giving me such opportunity to explain myself more as a Saudi guy than executive. So I grew up witnessing several stages for Saudi football, which makes me again go back to the history and explaining 3 facts. The first fact is related to the football identity within the kingdom, as the game has been always a main catalyst that really identified kingdom identity to the world. As the recent top signings is not the first time. For example, it's not the first time to history to have a legends playing over the grounds. Back in time to the first professionalization era I just mentioned about, GSA have supported such kind of signings. So if you search a bit, you will find that many legends such as Revellino, Mario Zagallo, Dide, Dietmar Kramer, either Puskás, all of them have all touched down the kingdom either to play and coach over there. In fact, such fact played a paranormal role in promoting the national player standards back then and helping Saudi Arabia to live a golden era and one of the most successful eras in Saudi football history, which witnessed 2 Asian Cups consecutive wins, a qualification for the Olympics for the first time, either international success by winning under-16 FIFA World Cup in 1989. Then the second fact is about pioneering and being creative in the game. And many people don't aware about that Saudi Arabia has been always a creative side in the game. And here I just want to refer to His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Fahd. He was the founder of many regional tournaments. However, his innovative thinking has went much beyond that as well and reached international level. He founded the King Fahd Intercontinental Cup, which been adopted later by FIFA as an official FIFA Confederation Cup. The last fact I really want to mention about, it's really about mega events in link to country preparation in hosting huge mega events. For example, Asian Cup, Asian Games, World Cup, and World Football Summit.
Yeah, exactly. Biggest of them all.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah. Do you know that the country was really the pioneer in bringing the mega events to GCC region? It happens. It happens when country hosted the first FIFA tournament in the region. That was FIFA Under-20 World Cup in 1989. However, in reference to Confederation Cup, Saudi Arabia have hosted 3 editions: 1992, 1995, and 1997. And to conclude it all, to say it all, I guess such facts would easily describe country's uniqueness, and that in terms of having deep football heritage, other than considered like a geopolitical agenda or soft power strategy or even a trend. Otherwise, the game would never survive that long. And if you have a look as well about the history of Saudi clubs, you can find that the oldest football club in the region is founded in Saudi Arabia. That was almost 100 years ago. And if you find the newest historical club in Saudi Arabia, you can find it almost like 5 decades actually. So that could explain that the upcoming global brands have already a deep roots in the game. Not just like having a new brand and invested, and maybe that's happened in several cases we just mentioned.
Yeah, so identity, being a pioneer, and expertise in celebrating mega events, just to sum up for the audience. I mean, and that if you put that all together, it's a recipe for uniqueness, definitely. No, thank you for that, Fathi. Yeah. And now we're going to think about that both of you are here, and I want to ask you some just kind of like general questions. And Konstantin, I mean, maybe we can start with you. No, I guess the audience wants to understand, what does the future of the football industry look like? From your perspective, and do we really believe that, that's going to be possible, that, call it, the power balance of football is going to become, it's going to reach a more equilibrium? What would you say?
Well, Jaime, I think it's incredible to sit here in the midst of a challenging global situation. We've had quite an interesting, if you want to use that word, period over the last few years with pandemics, wars, economic difficulties all around the world, and at the same time we are sitting here and saying and then talking about the growth of the football industry. But it is kind of true in a way that football as an industry has been incredibly resilient, not just for the last several years, but in general for the last decades. It has been growing despite downturns and global conflicts. Even as Fathi was going back in history, they found a way to play football even during the darkest day of World War II in the 1940s. So now it's probably child's play. But I mean, to answer your question, and in a more serious way, I think we probably need to define what balance means in terms of, when you ask, is football going to redraw its power balance map? Because you can balance things in several ways, right? You can equalize the top, you can equalize at the bottom, or you can equalize in the middle. And it's kind of a little bit what seems to be happening with men's and women's football, for instance, in terms of their disparity of revenues. But in general, our firm opinion is that the European market is kind of reaching a certain ceiling, especially since it's rooted in the current territorial model, right? Because in Europe, you have relatively few large countries. The vast majority of countries are kind of medium-sized, smaller. And even though they are very prosperous, well, some of them, a lot of them, but still, the demographic quality is not fully there to produce really global level results. So pretty much all the major European countries, with maybe one or two exceptions, are kind of there or thereabouts in terms of their football properties. So this leaves the stage open to all the countries in the world that are able to leverage their demographic and economic resources and actually come up with a self-sustaining football economy of their own on a large scale. So for us, I think the growth is really going to be outside of Europe.
And I guess I'm thinking, because you guys have been speaking to executives for this report. So are there any, I don't know if we've got to call conclusions, or are there any common patterns, views that these executives had in terms of the potential that they see on their markets, and how can this translate to the overall growth of the industry?
Well, I think one of the things that was really evident during certainly the vast majority, if not all, of the conversations that we've had, is that there is actually a real optimism around the world for developing their domestic and their regional football competition. And interestingly, in most cases, that they realize that they need to find their own model rather than just simply import the best case, the European best case scenario, like the English Premier League approach, and just hope that beds in. Because in reality, it's not going to happen. Because the conditions that allowed the English Premier League to do what they did are probably not present in other parts of the world. So there is clear excitement, and there's also a feeling that things are kind of moving, developing. I think what is going to be really important for the football entrepreneurs and the administrators of the clubs, the leagues, is for them to choose the right mechanisms and tools to make it all happen. Because there are a lot of opportunities out there, especially with the new technologies of media broadcasting, content creation, content distribution, monetization, but also management systems, the systems that allow you to actually operate the clubs and the leagues, and also, very, very importantly, sources of knowledge in terms of what things actually work, what things don't work. Those case studies, as Fathi said when he was talking about Saudi Arabia, they're actually there, and we have been building them up over the last several decades. You can look at J League, for example. You could look at the MLS case. You can now look at the Saudi Arabian case. You could look at the Qatari case. You could look at South Africa. You could look at what happened in China for that matter. And you can learn everywhere. So it is actually now possible. There are tools in place to enable almost a quick professionalization of clubs and league structures in a very efficient way, that also needs to be accepted by the existing football ecosystem, because that is also important. You cannot just completely rip up everything. As we have seen, the real successful cases come where there have been improvements to something that's already been there.
Okay, good. That's well, several things that you mentioned there were important, but that last piece, I mean, at the end of the day, you really need to have a strong foundation, call it, if you will, because that's going to be the base of everything, and then you're going to leverage from, as you said, improved technology, professionalization of the industry, better management of the pitch, right, and also knowledge, transferable skills at the end of the day, no? So that's super interesting. And guys, I mean, you guys alluded to this before. What about women's football? Because everybody, is seeing the amazing growth that, finally we're seeing. So, and I know it deserves its own episode, probably its own report. But I mean, I don't know if we can briefly address the potential you see behind the women's game.
Let me answer this quite quickly, and then I would actually be quite interested to hear what Fathi has to say about this, because it's interesting I guess the position of women's football, especially in the Saudi Arabian case. But like I said before, there's almost a feeling, right, that men's and women's football needs to be somehow rebalanced, right? Because the revenues and the prominence that the men's game is able to achieve far outstrips the women's game. And there are obvious expectations that come with that. And women's football, especially in the last 5-10 years, you can see it has grown massively. But with some of those expectations, you can see that they're kind of leading to frustration in situations, for example, where, like what the FIFA President Gianni Infantino mentioned before the recent World Cup, that viewing figures on the women's side, at least in World Cup matches, the highest level, they're actually extremely healthy, and growing, but somehow they're not being translated into revenues on a comparable basis with the men's game, right? Which kind of on one hand seems a bit strange and unfair, but at the same time, I think the potential, of course, is huge, because you're talking about half of the population of the world. But I think the fundamental thing really is for the women's game to not end up being a kind of support act for the men's game. It really needs to have a completely its own standalone, fully enclosed pathway from grassroots to elite, rather than, being a CSR complement or kind of almost like a secondary thing to the men's game. It really needs to be its own thing with its own successes, maybe sometimes its own failures, but really its own pathway, its own commercial model. And I think then they can really realize the huge potential that they have. Fathi, maybe you can tell a little bit about what's happening with women's football in Saudi, because I guess the room for growth is much higher in Saudi Arabia between in the women's side than on the men's side.
Yeah, here I would just also mention about, it's not really just about Saudi Arabia, it's about the whole region actually. So if you go, for example, to CAF, the African Football Confederation, they started to have a club competition, for example, and such club competition have really it's almost the same that what UEFA is doing. If you go to UEFA, the first editions of Women's Champions League, you will find a different teams than the successful teams of men's side. And currently, it transited to medium clubs, and then to large clubs. Now we have seen also we have also seen Barcelona, we have seen Chelsea are competing. It's going almost the same for the African side. For example, it started with some of the clubs, and some clubs really established their own teams because just to be there and just to stage themselves on the continental level. While if you go to the GCC region, or not GCC, West Asia region, you can see now two different models. The first model is the self-development models, which Jordan have started since 2005, educating themselves, promoting the game gradually until reaching to be the best in the region. And also you can see also the second model of Saudi Arabia, which is a bit same like on the men's side, but with different. For example, the national team, they didn't push the national team to play, for example, tough games. No, it's playing that with teams with similar levels, and also for the clubs. And what's really potential in the West Asia region, I would say here that both models are working together, and they started to they establish the competition, which taking the champions from here and there, which unlock the learning opportunities for, and that could really have a great potential. And we can really see also the whole region is growing on that, because it's really following the same successful models, which is the same thing that I just said, that when you copy paste something, or when you copy something and learn it from something, you have more advantage than the original case, because you have here an opportunity to estimate the potential challenges and many solutions that you can have it based on your resources, or even based on the expertise of the previous case. So potentially here I see region is really growing. And also, a last thing I wanted to contribute, that the region is really very old on that. I mentioned about Jordan in 2005. I can mention also about Egypt that have a women's league in 1995. But those leagues somehow didn't survive. But then after seeing the game grow on the global aspect, it really grows again. And we see also some banned competitions or abolished competitions are really back again to life. So here I see here also the region have much potential to compete high.
But sorry to interrupt, but that actually goes back to what Konstantin was mentioning before. I mean, I think the region has developed a strong foundation, as you said. You've been seeing the success of the women's football in the region for years, not now, since 2005, right? So that's gonna obviously help. It's growing interest from the grassroots up. So it goes back to what we were mentioning before, no? And that's gonna help grow the game eventually, Yeah. And also, I fully agree with what you were saying before, Konstantin, and it's actually something that I've spoken with other leaders in the industry. At the end of the day, women's football has to follow its own path. One of the things that it needs to focus on is to grow sustainably, meaning it's very easy to fall into the trap of just growing for the sake of growth without looking into the profitability of the game, just because we're riding a positive wave or a positive momentum. So it's its own path, not repeating what some may see as mistakes of, just trying to achieve growth for the sake of growth, right? So thank you. I mean, that's interesting. And again, I mean, we might need to do a future conversation on women's football just by itself, but which, kind of leads me to my next question. Is there going to be other version of the report in the future?
Well, hopefully, of course, because for us, this is the result of work that stemmed from our curiosity of what was happening in the global panorama, specifically outside of Europe, because we all know what's happening in Europe. We have a lot of information, and it's kind of it's being fed on a daily basis. But what is happening outside of Europe, and also outside of the major kind of prominent centers outside of Europe as well. So in medium-sized countries and smaller countries. And this is just a first snapshot. So of course the curiosity is always there to see how things evolve over time. And we are very, very open to look at more countries, for example, because of course, as I mentioned before, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to cover all the 200 plus FIFA member countries in a single publication. But for example, if some of the listeners, if you come from a club or from a league in a country that we haven't covered, and there's, feel free to reach out to us. We're going to be extremely happy to talk to you and maybe include it as an addendum or as an additional case. But also, the way that we've done it, I think it also opens up the possibility of looking at the same countries that we have covered in this first publication, say in 3-5 years' time, to see what has changed in terms of how they perceive themselves and their uniqueness, for example, or whether they have been able to actually reach those goals that they set for themselves when they were talking to us today. Mm-hmm. And I think this is going to be the value in this work if we're able to repeat it at regular intervals, because things change, things evolve. So this is almost like a snapshot to allow us to keep a record of what was happening in 2023, 2024.
Interesting. Well, definitely we'll be here to, whenever you guys want to speak about these awesome reports, we'll be here to talk about them. As you can see, I'm willing to ask the questions, no? So, guys, this has been a fantastic masterclass. I really want to thank you for it. I mean, I just learned so much. Before we go, I did want to ask a question that I usually ask all my guests. As you know, we've launched a rebrand at World Football Summit. And since we're speaking about the future of the industry, I think this is a very fitting question to this conversation. Part of this rebrand is, we believe that the future of the industry, I mean, the industry needs to commit to excellence, to embrace innovation, to really embrace sustainability as well across its three pillars. So, economic, social, environmental. So if I were to ask you very briefly, how would you define the football industry you want or the football industry you need? Whoever wants to start, but I would be very interested in hearing your opinions.
I think I can start first, Fathi, if you don't mind. I think we need a football industry that is not a museum piece, but is a living, breathing environment, which is actually aiming to keep expanding rather than retreating into kind of consolidation mode, trying to keep what we have already. An environment where experimentation and failure are also possible, but the basis is set on sustainability. And for this, we have to think back to the origins. We referred to history a few times already in this podcast, and almost invoke the entrepreneurial spirit of the original founding fathers of football, the ones who actually created the first clubs and the first leagues, who had a fantastic new sport on their hands, and they had to somehow deal with creating, improvising, inventing ways to make it appeal to the masses, but also make it worth their while from a business, from a commercial point of view. And what they came up with has served us for the best part of the last 100 years. But I think now probably is time for a refresh on that. But this is a whole new discussion that we can have.
The whole new report. Guys, you're gonna be very busy with all these reports. Fathi, I don't know if you wanna add something. No, you good?
Konstantin have concluded also. I don't think what I was thinking about, Konstantin have already mentioned in the last two questions.
Good stuff. All right, so you guys are aligned. I'm happy to hear that. Good. All right, guys. So, we, for those listening are interested to find out more about the report, we've uploaded this to our website. Anybody can just download it there. But I don't know, guys, if you wanna tell the audience more about where they can learn more about either you, about LTT Sports, whatever. I mean, the floor is yours.
Well, of course, we will also upload this to our website, lttsports.com, and I'm pretty sure that some of our colleagues are going to be with you, Jaime, in Jeddah in December as well. So don't hesitate to come and meet us.
Yeah, for sure, and for sure we'll be there. We'll be around, and also and refer to our website again. So I'm pretty sure as well that our listener could find another studies and another related studies about many regions in the world in regards football. So
yeah. And one thing I was wanting to mention as well, kind of maybe as the last thing, we also do a bi-weekly newsletter on LinkedIn, where of course we go into the topic of football around the world. Not only football, other sports as well, but mostly football. I'm not going to give you the address of it, but if you find LTT Sports on LinkedIn, the name of our newsletter is Pitchside Monitor. So as good football geeks, we decided to call it something appropriate with a kind of with a technological and analytical background. So Pitchside Monitor on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I actually started following that newsletter before we were in touch. So I highly recommend to anybody listening that, they subscribe to that newsletter, because the analysis, the interviews, the in-depth analysis really that you guys share is for those of us that are in the industry, it's a can't miss. So I highly recommend that. Guys, Fathi, Konstantin, thank you so much. This has been so fun. I look forward to bringing you back in the future and see, how the industry is evolving at a global level and any of the findings that you guys have. We'll see each other soon, Fathi. So thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you, Jaime.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.
And there you have them, Konstantin and Fathi, in a conversation that was full of insights. Rather than going into the takeaways for each market they discussed, I would just rather share with you some, general lessons to take away. First, football is resilient to economic downturns, to conflict. At the end of the day, the passion that people have for it, despite unfavorable circumstances, help push it forward. Each market or region has huge level of optimism to reach their potential, finding their unique model. And the base of these models are 3 pillars: technology, good management, and new knowledge. And finally, women's football has tremendous potential, but it needs to find its own path and focus on growing sustainably. If you want to go deep into a particular market, remember you can download the full report on our website, www.worldfootballsummit.com. Again, that's www.worldfootballsummit.com. And Fathi and other members of LTT Sports are going to be with us at Jeddah on the 12th and 13th of December. So if you want to buy a ticket, you can do so at asia.worldfootballsummit.com. Again, that's asia.worldfootballsummit.com. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast on your platform of choice and share it with your industry colleagues. Oh, and before we go, if you're joining us for WFS Asia and still do not have accommodation, our friends from Radisson are offering special discounts to attendees. Their hotels are simply amazing, and this is a unique opportunity to live their experience at a unique price. Check them out at radissonhotels.com. Again, that's radissonhotels.com. And you can ask us for that special discount for WFS Asia attendees. Visit our website to do so. Remember, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can find the link in the show notes. And finally, I just want to thank you for tuning into this episode of the World Football Summit podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. I'm sure I did. Anyway, have a great day, and we hope to see you next time.